And I've been to blame also. Have I not often sent you water my flowers instead of learning or your lessons? So M. Hamel, being very humble on that day, he tells that it was his mistake also to send the students to water the plants or to just give a holiday when he wanted to go on fishing. Then, from one thing to another, M. Hamel went on to talk of the French language, saying that it was the most beautiful language in the world, the clearest, the most logical, that we must guard it among us and never forget it. So, M. Hamel says that he highlights here that the French language was the most beautiful, the most clearest, and the most logical that the Frenchmen should guard, and therefore should guard it and should not forget the language. Because when a people are enslaved, as long as they hold fast to the language, it is as if they had the key to their prison. So here, M. Hamel says that as long as people of a country knows their own language, they can be very easy free themselves from enslavement. Then he opened a grammar and read us our lessons. I was amazed to see how well I understood. All he said seemed so easy, so easy. I think too that I had never listened so carefully and that he had never explained everything that so much with patience. So that last lesson of French class was very special because Franz also was understanding because he was attentive on that day. So when students are attentive, they can understand the chapter very well. And he also mentions that he was able to understand M. Hamel's class because he too was very patiently teaching on that day. It was as if they were all clinging to that last lesson to keep the French language in the core of their hearts. It seemed almost as if the poor man wanted to give us all he knew before going away and to put it all into our heads at one stroke. So the attention of the student and the patience of the teacher was for the reason that that was the last lesson, and the teacher wanted to impart all his knowledge to the students so that the students also could learn as much as they can on the last lesson. After the grammar, he had a lesson in writing. That day, M. Hamel had new copies for us, written in a beautiful round hand. Franz, Alce, Franz, Alce. They looked like little flights floating everywhere in the schoolroom. So after the grammar lesson, M. Hamel took over the lesson in writing. And in beautiful round hand, his beautiful handwriting, he wrote Franz, Alce, Franz, Alce. That shows the love for the country, that how they were wanting to remain in their country. They looked like little flags floating everywhere in the schoolroom, hung from the rod at the top of our desks. You ought to have seen how everyone set to work and how quiet it was. So the last lesson is described in this way, that class was, everyone was attentive and everyone was serious at their desk working, and how quiet, how silent the class was. The only sound was the scratching of the pens over the paper. Once some beetles flew in, but nobody paid any attention to them, not even the littlest ones, who worked right on tracing their fish hooks as if that was French too. So there was the beetles also flew in, but nobody paid any attention to the buzzing of the beetles, but they were all busy using their pen, that is scratching the pen on the paper. And the littlest ones means the little students also drawing fish hooks, as if the fish hooks also belonged to their own country, France. On the roof of the pigeon's roof, the pigeons cooed very low. And how I thought to myself, will they make them sing in German, even the pigeons? So little Franz also could hear the pigeons cooing very soft and low, as if they were all set up, all conducive to the environment of the country being taken away by the Prussians. And little Franz thought that the pigeons would also be taught to coo in Germans, which becomes very obvious that nothing can be forced on any living things. Whenever I looked up from my writing, I saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair and gazing first at one thing, then at another, as if he wanted to fix in his mind just how everything looked in that little school room. So on that day, on the last class, Franz could observe that M. Hamel was sitting very motionless and he was gazing from one thing to another. That is, he was looking from one thing to another as if he wanted to imprint in his mind everything on that last class. Fancy, for 40 years he had been there in the same place with his garden outside the window and his class in front of him. Just like that, only the desks and benches had been worn smooth. So for 40 long years, M. Hamel had been taking class in that very classroom, and the benches and desks were worn out, means they had become old, and the walnut trees in the garden had become very tall, and the hopvine that he had planted himself twined about the windows to the roof. That is, they were all had become old shrubs and trees. How it must have broken his heart to leave it all, poor man, to hear his sister moving about in the room above, packing their trunks. So, Franz observes that the teacher, M. Hamel, must have been very sad on that day, and his sister, who was moving about in the room above. And what was she doing? She was packing the trunks. Trunks are big boxes in which things are used to be kept. For they must leave the country next day. Why leave the country? Because Russians would take over Alsace from the next day. But he had the courage to hear every lesson to the very last. After the writing, we had a lesson in history. And then the babies chanted their ba, be, bi, bo, bo. So what is ba, be, bi, bo, bo? These are the phonics, the sounds which the elementary lessons teach. Down there at the back of the room, old Hauser had put on his spectacles and holding his primer, that is the elementary book, in both hands, spelled the letters with them. You could see that he too was crying. His voice trembled with emotion. Why the voice trembled with emotion? Because he was regretting that he hadn't learned in his all long life the simple elementary chapters of French language. As if it was so funny to hear him that we all wanted to laugh and cry. Ah, how well I remember it, that last lesson. All at once the church clock struck 12. Then the Angelus. So, at once the church clock struck 12, that is, it was noon. And the Angelus is the sound which is rung by the church bells, and in the early morning, at noon, and in the evening. So what time was that? That was the noon when the Angelus clock struck, church clock struck. At the same moment, the trumpets of the Prussians, returning from drill, sounded under our windows. M. Hamel stood up very pale in his chair. I never saw him look so tall. That is the last lesson. Little Franz was really appreciating his teacher, M. Hamel, and he said that particular day he was looking very confident, very tall, very, very protruding, so that he could teach everything he knew about French language. My friends, said he, I, but something choked him. He could not go on. Then he turned to the blackboard, took a piece of chalk, and bearing on with all his might, he wrote as large as he could, Vive la France. That is, Vive la France is long live France. He could not face the students in the class. He just turned towards the blackboard and wrote, Long live France. Then he stopped and leaned his head against the wall, and without a word, he made a gesture to us with his hand, School is dismissed, you may go. That is, he signaled to everyone to leave the class, and that was the end of the last lesson.